I keep doing that. You should be able to hear me just fine now. No sounds. Hopefully there's sound now. Howdy, howdy. Greetings from Web King Hall. Oh, that's silly. All right. Let me just share this one other location. I hope Web King Hall is treating you well. Hope Greeley's treating you well. Do they still have a number to call to report offensive odors? All right, excellent. You've been reading any Ultimate or Absolute comics? Ultimate, Spidey, and Wolverine are good. I haven't read I've read Absolute Batman. I'm told I need to read Absolute Superman. I have not. I don't think I've read Ultimate Spidey, unless you're like there's an older Ultimate Spidey. Sarah Pichelli, I think, did the Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man, and I thought that was phenomenal. I've been wanting to ask you if the Bible says anything about tarot cards and psychics and the like. Like, is it really bad for Christians to partake in? Well, the Bible would have a problem with that. It would dismiss that as like witchcraft and divination and stuff like that. But the Bible has divination too, that is authorized. A lot of priestly divination is no different. It's just the Bible doesn't like when it's not being done by a person who's authorized, and the divine agency that is being sought after is not the correct divine agency. So there's a lot of discussion in the scholarship about notions of magic in the Bible and divination, and why the Bible seems so upset with it when it's endorsing it in certain circumstances. So I think if you were just going by the Bible, it would whine about things like tarot cards and the like. Literally just had a guy tell me that my tattoos are a violation of God's laws. Curious what Leviticus actually says. It does have a part about tattoos, but as far as we can tell, this is referencing folks who tattoo themselves as a mortuary ritual, as a way to mourn. And so it seems to be about not adopting the mourning ritual practices of the nations around Israel, which isn't really what's going on with tattoos today. So I think most folks would say, yeah, the context for that, the rationale behind that, the spirit of that has nothing to do with why the overwhelming majority of people get tattoos today. Thoughts on Dale Allison? He seems to affirm the resurrection as a possibility historically, but unprovable historically. He affirms you could believe the resurrection, but be unhindered by the data. I think Dale Allison's discussion of the resurrection is probably the one of the better, if not the best, scholarly approach to arguing for the resurrection that's available. I still think it's not logical, but that's just me. Thank you for the super chat, Koopa 1282. Any thoughts on the Son of Man receiving a latreo worship in Daniel, and how that would have been received by Second Temple Jews? You have a couple different places. The Greek translation of Daniel, but you also have the Son of Man who's going to be worshipped by everyone on earth in the parables of Enoch, which are probably 1st century BCE, 1st century CE, somewhere around there. And even the Revelation, I believe it's 3:9, says where it whines about the synagogue of Satan. It says, "I will make them; they will come and worship at your feet." And the verb there is proskuneo, which if that does not mean worship, it's the only time the author of Revelation ever uses that word and does not mean worship. So I think it's pretty clear that there was kind of an eschatological expectation that worship was, the scope of worship was going to expand in the end time. Nobody really fleshes out exactly what that's about, but I think that's the little toehold that allows Jesus to say, "Oh yeah, that's me." So I think there certainly would have been Second Temple Jewish folks who would have been upset about that, but the literature of First Enoch, of the Greek translation of Daniel, what we have in the Book of Revelation suggests that I think there also would have been folks who would have been perfectly fine with it. Water Collider says, love your content. I would love your thoughts on passages in the Bible used in arguments about the real presence in the Eucharist. John 6:53 through 58 and Last Supper remarks are big ones. I mean, the text doesn't, the text is not going to fight you on that. If you want to interpret it that way, the text cannot stop you. But I have laundry on my couch that I just noticed is in the background. But I don't know that that's what was initially intended. I don't think that's very likely. But at the same time, there's my book, Adonai's Divine Images, talks an awful lot about the need to have material media that manifested the presence of the deity or their agency. And so that would certainly make sense of that. But I would be surprised if that is what the authors of the New Testament intended. I think that is a reinterpretation. I think it was a reinterpretation that likely arose pretty early on, but is a reinterpretation nonetheless. But yeah, I should look deeper into that and see what scholarship has been published on that recently. Steve, thank you so much for the super chat. I hear the argument that the Exodus never happened due to lack of archaeological evidence. Not just lack of archaeological evidence, but the presence of archaeological evidence that precludes something like the Exodus. But the much grander Vandal migration into Tunisia also has no archaeological evidence for it, and nobody dares deny it. I got to be honest, I don't know much about that. I've heard that mentioned, but I wouldn't know enough about the lack of archaeological evidence to talk about the relationship of the two. But it's not just a lack, again, of archaeological evidence. It's that the Exodus tradition, as it has come down to us, was clearly written down after the 9th century BCE, 500 or so years after it was supposed to have happened, because you do not have historical prose, narrative historical prose in alphabetic languages until the late 9th century BCE. And so if you find historical narrative prose in the Hebrew Bible, that was written late 9th century BCE at the very earliest. So the articulation of the Exodus tradition in narrative prose is much later, hundreds of years later. The only part of the tradition that could be earlier is the Song of the Sea from Exodus 15. And that's the details are, one, quite limited, and two, don't actually line up perfectly with the rest of the narrative. And then when you look at the Egyptian archaeology, there's just no place to fit those events. It just doesn't work. It's not that there's just a lack of archaeological evidence, it's that the archaeological evidence argues directly against these events having taken place. So I don't think that the majority of scholars don't think that it is historical. I think the best that folks who want to argue for historicity can do is suggest that this is an elaboration, an expansion of some kind of social memory that goes back to some small group that maybe escaped from slavery out of Egypt or somewhere in the northern or central hill country. And over the centuries, their story just grew and grew and grew and accreted more and more details. Because the way we have it now doesn't fit any part of Egyptian history, but does fit the concerns and the circumstances of the history of Israel and Judah, beginning in like the 8th century BCE, but more clearly in the post-exilic period, which is when the majority of scholars think that it reached its final form. So there are a bunch of avenues to approach this that result in the same conclusion that probably didn't actually happen. But thank you for the question. And I'll have to look into that Vandal migration into Tunisia. Hang on just a second. All right. I've pulled something up on that. I will look into that, so if this question comes up again, I can be a little better prepared. Thank you, Didymus, for a question. Did Israel's neighbors worship one god? Who worshipped Baal? So Baal was Northwest Semitic storm deity who was probably worshipped by a lot of people, including probably early Israelites. But the Bible seems to attribute it to the Syrians, Tyre and Sidon and things like that to the north. And I think that makes sense. There would have been like a national deity for most of these places, like Moab. It would have been Chemosh. You had the Ammonites would have been Milcom. The Bible is not always correct about all of these, but it wouldn't have been one deity to the exclusion of any and all others. It would have been one main deity, and then people would have had ancestral deities, people would have had local deities, people would have had secondary deities, and all kinds of different deities. And that's what we find in early Israel as well. So territorial states being smaller as they were, Israel, Moab, Ammon, these groups, they would not have had the giant pantheons that we see in Mesopotamia and Egypt, but they would not have been monotheistic by any stretch of the imagination. But thank you for a great question. Sorry, I keep getting texts from a neighbor. Okay. Daryl, thank you so much for the super chat. On the concept of salvation, do we see this evolve over time and across various religions? Salvation is something that not all religions have a notion of salvation, but even within the Bible, we see change. This is something that I talked about in a recent video, where salvation in most of the Hebrew Bible is really about deliverance from temporal threats to physical safety and things like that. So you're saved from enemies, you're saved from death, you're saved from illness. It has nothing to do with some kind of spiritual salvation or afterlife or anything like that. That's something that develops after we get kind of the establishment of a notion of post-mortem divine reward and punishment. And that's where salvation is getting the reward rather than the punishment. So there's certainly change within the Bible, and there are other religions that have concepts of salvation, but yeah, they're all very different from each other, because most of them are they're addressing different needs, they're addressing different anxieties, and they're using different frameworks as metaphors for understanding what exactly is going on. And even within Christianity, you have different models of atonement, where you have different metaphors for understanding exactly what's going on that have ebbed and flowed over time. But thank you for a great question. Alidander or Aildander, thank you so much for the question. Will you respond to IP's video attacking you? Which one? I haven't watched a video of IP's in a long time, and no, I will not respond. I've demonstrated numerous times over he does not engage in good faith. And I don't care what videos he makes. He is welcome to publish all the videos he wants. And I'm sure that the folks who enjoy his content will have those tuning forks in their loins go off when they see them. And I'm happy for them. Dr. Clark Van Gilder, thank you so much for the question. Have there been any credible challenges to Poirier's work on theopneustos? I have not seen any yet. I ran into him at not last year's SBL, but I think 2 years ago at SBL, and I asked him that, and apart from reviews that were like, "Oh, this is interesting, this is fascinating. If this turns out to be accurate, this changes a lot." But other than that, there wasn't really much in the way of pushback or challenges. So I'm interested to see if somebody does publish anything. But I think the argument is pretty sound. I mean, when you go look at all the occurrences of that word, it's being used in context where it does not make sense to understand it as inspiration as we know it, and there was already a word for inspiration as we know it. So yeah, I haven't seen anything yet. I'm sure something will come up at some point. But thank you for the question. Orsak Narrative Universe. Good to see you again. Thank you so much for the question. I have recently been thinking of a strong analogy between Joseph Smith and Josiah. Thoughts? Hey guys, I just found this book. Love your work. Big fan. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think there certainly are analogies to saying, oh, this is the way we were supposed to be doing it all along. I'm restoring everything to the way it used to be. There's absolutely analogies there. And there are analogies between what Joseph Smith was trying to do with things like the Book of Moses and the Book of Abraham and Targumim. That's not to say he was doing Targumim or Midrash or anything like that, but there are analogies in that somebody who was arrogating the authority to themselves decided to take something that was understood as scripture and then revise it and expand on it and edit it so that it was understood to be kind of the same, but at the same time, something very, very different in order to fit their very different circumstances. So I think there are a lot of ways that the work of Joseph Smith has parallels in the ancient world, including in the Hebrew Bible, including in Second Temple Judaism and Rabbinic Judaism. So I think there's a lot of grist for that mill, but yeah, I haven't seen much published on in that, but that would be fun to see. If it weren't for those pesky Romans, Odin would be the supreme being. That very well could be. Wade Rogers says, Dan, the Bible proves the earth is flat. Well, it claims the earth is flat. If the earth is flat, then when Jesus returns, every eye shall see him. But if it is round, then only people on the side where he comes back can see him. LOL. Yes, that's one of the results of the notion that the earth was flat. Is that if somebody comes down from heaven, everybody should be able to see him. Cam Bam Dan, the laundry is your Mormonism. Surprisingly non-Mormon laundry, but I get what you're saying. Lisa, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Thank you for the question. Could Israel be a mythical group of people, a small group, or a wannabe? However, the land of Canaan and the people are true. Would that be true? I don't think so. I think certainly the way we understand the house of Israel and 12 tribes of Israel is certainly a later construct. But the nation of Israel was absolutely occupying that land thousands of years ago. And there's not really a plausible case to make against that. We can go all the way back to around 1208 BCE with the Merneptah stele, where the Egyptian pharaoh talks about having destroyed a people group known as Israel, and scholars are in almost unanimous agreement that this is a reference to the same people group that would later write the literature that is collected in the Hebrew Bible. So mythical in the sense of these tribes were not actually all descended from a single figure named Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Absolutely. Mythical in the sense that there was not a people group known as Israel occupying this land 3,000 years ago. No. Orsak, thank you so much for another super chat. Love your books. When's the next one coming? Hit us with your plans. I have to get a proposal to my publisher. They're waiting on it. And so I've got one in the works. Hopefully by the end of this month, I will have it to them. When I have a contract signed, I will share it with y'all. Well, I will let y'all know that the contract has been inked and what we're thinking it will be called, what it will be about, stuff like that. So within the next 2 months, I'm pretty confident I will have an announcement about that for y'all. Aaron, thank you for the super chat. Hey, Dan, I just finished reading your book. It was fantastic, especially the chapter on Asherah. Oh, awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Absolutely fascinating work. And for those who are not aware, this is the Bible says so, that they are talking about what we get right and wrong about Scripture's most controversial issues, which is in my Macmillan just decided to start up a TikTok shop, and they're featuring my book on the TikTok shop. So you can, if you're interested, you can get the book through my TikTok shop. But yeah, chapter 6, the Bible says God has a wife. And I really enjoyed writing this chapter. And also there are 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 drawings in there, and they were all done by me. And my favorite is the Kuntilidaj Rud Pithos A, drawing of Adonai and his Asherah with the inscription over the top, and I made a couple of different shirts out of this. So if you're interested in what the Bible has to say and what archaeology has to say about God's wife, that was a fun chapter to write, and I'm glad to hear, Aaron, that you enjoyed it. I appreciate it very much. Hey, Dan, what did you think about South Park's Charlie Kirk episode? I have not watched it. I don't have a ton of time for recreational television, and so I tend to be very selective about what I watch. I've seen clips, but I have not watched the whole episode. Steve, thank you so much for the question. Why didn't Constantine or Theodosius the first turn the temple of Jupiter in Jerusalem into a church? That's a great question. It was Constantine's mother who kind of went into the Holy Land to kind of go engage in some archaeotourism and ask where everything was, and so brought back a lot of information about traditions about where things were located. Why they didn't turn it into a church, I don't know if it was fear of angering folks. It didn't seem like they were very concerned about that kind of fear, but in Constantine's day, the only real change was that it was no longer illegal to be Christian. That did not become the official religion of the Roman Empire until 380-ish. So that's interesting. I'm sure there are folks who have talked about that, but I have not seen any scholarship directly addressing that question. I'll have to look into that. Jonathan, thank you so much for the question. Would you consider debating Dr. Robert Gagnon on a neutral YouTube channel? No. Dr. Gagnon does not engage in good faith, much like IP. I've already gone over all the different ways he misrepresents and misunderstands me, misunderstands and misrepresents the scholarship I cite, and then asserts claims that are minority views without even acknowledging, much less engaging, what the majority positions are. And I just don't do live debates anyway. I don't think those are helpful ways to disseminate knowledge. I think it's more about performance or performative identity politics. So I'm not interested in live debates. Jesus Tales, thank you so much for the question. Do you think Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John read the book of Jesus in the LXX? If you mean Joshua, yes. And if you'll give me just 1 second. The best discussion of this is Timothy Michael Law, who was my Oxford thesis advisor. When God Spoke Greek, the Septuagint, and the Making of the Christian Bible is a wonderful discussion of the way that the Septuagint was used within early Christianity. And there are a number of indications that all the authors of New Testament texts relied primarily, if not exclusively, on the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. So yes, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And, you have like Matthew, when he says that Jesus rode triumphantly into Jerusalem on 2 animals at the same time. It's probably based on a very literal reading of the Greek translation of the prophecy. And there are a number of examples of passages where the quotations of scripture that either the narrator is saying, and this was done to fulfill what has been said by the prophets, or put in Jesus's mouth, are very clearly coming from the Septuagint. So, for instance, when Jesus gets up and reads from the scroll of Isaiah in the synagogue, that's coming from the Septuagint. So yeah, they were, they would have, if they read Joshua, and they almost certainly did, it would have been the Greek Septuagint's version of Joshua. Jimmy Thompson asks, is the book tour over? Yes, the current book tour is over. We had a couple of different types of events. I crowdfunded a book tour with my podcast co-host, Dan Beecher. We went to Chicago, to Seattle, to Portland, to LA, to Dallas, to Atlanta, to Philly, to DC. That was a lot of fun. We met a lot of great folks, had a great time. And then I also was invited out to a number of other places on my own. Went to Santa Barbara, went to Nashville, went to Boston, went to New York, and went to Arizona, Clarkdale, because I have a cousin who has a bookstore in Clarkdale. So yeah, but did a bunch of stuff, and then spent a couple weeks with my family in Italy at an academic conference, and more recently got back from San Diego Comic-Con. Been doing a lot of traveling, but yes, the book tour is over, and I told my publisher, and the book tour was for The Bible Says So, and I told my publisher for the next book, I'm going to have my agent is going to insist on publicity funding so that we don't have to crowdfund the book tour for the next book. So expect the next book tour to not cost as much. Hey, Chip, thank you so much for the question. Can't think of a good question on the Bible right now. So which was done better, Superman or Fantastic Four? Thanks for the daily education and speaking out against injustice and misinformation. I appreciate the kind words and the support, Chip. I have not seen Fantastic Four yet. I have not had the opportunity. Things have been quite busy. I really did enjoy Superman, though. I'm probably going to end up liking Superman more, but I am looking forward to checking out Fantastic Four. I wish I could have seen it by this point, but just hasn't been a possibility. Luke, thanks so much for the question. Is Romans 1:18-32 about a particular people and time, or was it supposed to be generalized to all people around the world? Well, it was written to a specific group of people, and yes, it was about the Greco-Roman world. It was condemning the people around them who were worshiping statues of animals and humans and things like that. So it was not like Paul was saying, I'm only talking about this one group of people and none of this is applicable to anybody else. But it's also not like he was saying this is the rule for all time and all places, because Paul expected Jesus to come back any day now. So when people appeal to Romans 13:1 and imagine that this has to do with all governments, it's like, no, Paul was just saying, hey, don't tick off the Romans right before Jesus comes back. He did not expect there to be any other governing powers. He expected it to be Rome, and you wanted to get along until Jesus returned and overthrew everything and instituted, whatever his idea was going to be about the end times. So Paul did not have the 1,000-yard stare going on in any of these texts. This was all for the here and now, and everything's going to be overturned in any day now anyway. And it didn't work out that way. So yeah, no, it's not generalizable. Because also he was flat wrong. The notion that same-sex impulses are a punishment from God for failing to discern from your observation of nature how God expects to be worshipped is laughably wrong. I mean, you obviously had folks within Judaism, followers of Jesus and others who had a homosexual orientation who were not worshiping God incorrectly or failing to appropriately worship God. So the notion that same-sex impulses are just that punishment is just demonstrably false. So it was not broadly applicable, and a lot of it was also incorrect. Josh, thank you so much for the question. Josephus spends more time on John the Baptist than Jesus. Gospels go out of their way to praise him, acknowledge baptism. Seems likely John was more famous than Jesus within their lifetimes. No, John was probably more influential, certainly before and probably during a good part of Jesus's ministry. I think his influence was probably wider, and that's why he leaves more of a footprint within the historical texts. There's a couple of books that you could check out if you wanted to learn more. James McGrath, a good friend of mine, has published 2 books that are kind of biographies of John the Baptist. Christmaker, A Life of John the Baptist, and this is the shorter, more popular, more easy to read version. And then he's got John of History, Baptist of Faith, The Quest for the Historical Baptizer, which is a longer, more academic, more technical discussion. But if you would like to learn more about what at least James thinks we can reconstruct about the historical John the Baptist, those are two recent books that I think do a really good job of that. But yeah, John the Baptist probably left a larger footprint on history, at least in that first century, than Jesus. And that's when the Jesus trajectory takes off, though. Can you say transubstantiation? I knew you could. Yes, of course I can say transubstantiation. I used to. I don't know. Gosh, I feel like I can say it in a few different languages. I'm trying to think of what it might be in Spanish. It can't just be transubstantiat. Oh gosh, now I'm mixing different languages. I know I used to know what it was in Spanish. Dan, have you drawn anything recently? No, not really. I've done some technical drawings. I'm trying to think if I owe anybody drawings. Some scholars who have images and they like can't get copyright or to publish them in a book or a paper, they'll send them to me and I'll draw them for them. I've done that a handful of times recently. In fact, there's a new book that just is either just out now or is about to come out called Understanding the Hebrew Bible. And my dissertation supervisor, Francesca Stavrokopoulou, has a paper in that, and she talks about iconography and imagery and uses some drawings that I've done for her. But like comic book art, no, I haven't had a time where I'm like, I have nothing to do, I'm going to draw some comic book stuff. I wish I did, but it's been a long time since I've had that kind of time. Letheas, thank you so much for the question. What do you think of Alan Watts' thoughts on Christianity and the teachings of Jesus? I don't know that I'm familiar with Alan Watts' ideas on Christianity and the teachings of Jesus. What was this? A couple of years ago? Talked about religion. I'll have to look this up. I've got a few references to it. He saw Jesus. The AI overview is describing his thoughts as if it's kind of a neo-Gnosticism. Yeah, if this AI overview from Googling Alan Watts' thoughts on Christianity and Jesus is at all accurate, it sounds like he's just kind of riffing on neo-Gnosticism. But I'll have to look deeper into that. But no, I have not looked into that. But thank you for putting it on my radar. I will keep that tab up as well. Nemo, thank you so much for the question. I used to like listening to Dr. Michael Heiser, may he rest in peace. Was he sound in his interpretations and translations? I would say I considered Mike a friend. I don't know if he would have said the same about me. We disagreed on some things, particularly political things, and we disagreed on some scholarship. I think he was a really important voice within the evangelical world that helped people be more comfortable with recognizing that the Hebrew Bible recognizes numerous different gods. We differed on how much things changed regarding the perspective on deity in the Bible. I think that he had a pretty idiosyncratic take much of the time. And so while I would say his stuff would be an interesting point of departure, I would say you're on the most solid ground when you're looking at his dissertation. But like his the unseen realm, I think I would disagree with quite a bit in there, and his work on angels and Nephilim and things like that, I think is also it gets a little squishy when he's writing for a popular audience. But his work on divine plurality, I think, is good, even though I disagree with his idea of species uniqueness and all that kind of stuff. And I've got a paper that will be coming out in an edited volume that I am helping to edit. In fact, I have the intro, a draft of the intro here that I need to go through, the meanings and ends of monotheism, where we're talking about that, and so I talk a bit about Mike in that paper. But I would say outside of his dissertation and some of the papers that he's published on monotheism, I would take what he says with a grain of salt. Link Winder, thank you so much for the question. What's your favorite non-Doom Fantastic Four villain and why? It's been so long since I've collected Fantastic Four comics, and Doom was always my favorite. And I especially loved the world of I think it was Latveria. Is that I don't know if that's how it was pronounced, but I loved that world that they created, or at least it was entertaining. I think the Galactus and the Silver Surfer are always interesting. I think that's such an interesting. The story of the Silver Surfer having to follow around Galactus, I think it's such a fascinating story. But yeah, it's been a while since I've read the Fantastic Four comics that I collected are from like the 80s and early 90s, and I collected them in the 90s, so it's been a while. Wade, thanks so much for the question. The earth has to be flat because when Jesus returns, every eye will see him. If it's round, only people on one side will see him. LOL, flawless logic. Yes, that is how that's what made sense to them anciently. And yeah, in the Bible, the clearest conceptualization of the earth is that it was a flat disc surrounded by water. What's your opinion on Christians thinking space is fake? I think it is another symptom of the internet has done a lot of good things, but it has also, I think, facilitated this notion that everybody has access to all truth through the internet, and they don't have to develop any skills or critical thinking or use discipline or anything like that when it comes to research. And I think it has led to the dumbing down of a lot of things in the public discourse. And it's why we have anti-vax crap making a resurgence, and it's why we have kids being sent to the hospital because of raw milk, and why we have a serial sexual predator in the White House, and why we have a lot of problems that we have because people have abandoned critical thinking and are just leaning directly into their intuitions and their identity politics. Casey, thanks so much for the question. Hey, Dan, just curious what your thoughts are on books such as Karl Kautsky's Foundations of Christianity and Reza Aslan's Zealot. I've only read Zealot, and I think that's a decent enough introduction to the field of historical Jesus research. That's not his specialization. He's certainly not moving the needle of the consensus within that field of study. And historical Jesus researchers have a lot to say by way of criticism, but if somebody is not very familiar with that field, I think that's a perfectly fine gateway book, but make sure that that's not the only one you read. I'm not familiar with Kautsky's Foundations of Christianity. Hang on just a moment. This doesn't sound like a recent. Oh, that's from over 100 years ago. Authorized translation from the 13th German edition. I'm curious. This is coming from a time period that is characterized by an awful lot of bonkers scholarship. So, the Pope of Marxism, huh? I don't really know. Christian Orange. I'm probably going to be skeptical about about that book. But yeah, Reza Aslan's book, I'm going to say between the two, I'd probably recommend that one over the others. Austin, thank you, or over the other. Thank you so much for the question. Can you explain the Trinity logically? I can explain the logic, but there's no analogy that fits outside of it. So you just have to be able to hold these things in tension. The idea is basically to understand God, you have to separate out the notion of God's being and God's persons. And you multiply the persons. So there are three persons, and they simultaneously and fully occupy or comprise the one being of God. And the idea there is just you can only have one God, but obviously there are three different individuals being discussed in the text. How do you do that? Initially, the being and the persons were quite entangled. Like the ousia and the hypostasis were used as synonyms an awful lot. But in the second century CE, you had this kind of disentangling of these two concepts so that you could speak about one entity having an ousia and having a separate hypostasis. So the prosopological exegesis leads into this, and then that's how you have one God, but you have multiple persons. Now, once you try to either find an analogy for that, that is, something in the world that people can anchor that idea to, there's no such analogy. And it does run into logical problems because, you look in the text and it's like, well, why would Jesus need to pray to the other person that occupies the exact same being and shares the same mind with Jesus? You wouldn't even need to speak to communicate. And then you got this idea of, well, it's perichoresis, and Jesus chose to distinguish his human mind from the divine mind, and that's how it's the human mind that doesn't know stuff, but the divine mind is. And you just have to make up all these frameworks to account for the questions that are constantly popping up as people are considering the implications of the logic of the Trinity. So it is very obviously a conclusion in search of an argument. And they came up with an argument that they could back up by imperial power and imperial authority. And they got it sophisticated enough to where they could say, we're going to go with this. It sucks for you if you don't like it. And where we run into problems, we're just going to say mystery and leave it at that. And again, threaten you with exile if you don't like it. So it rests on the flimsiest of logical foundations, but logically that's what it is. One deity comprising three persons. Orsak narrative universe, obligatory compliment on your amazing beard, word to your barber. Vivi is my barber, and I will let her know that you said that. My wife hates my beard. So at least the way it feels anyway. Oh, I just saw a question. So I thought book on Christology incoming. Requesting a book, or you have a book, or you're going to mention a book? I've got a lot of books on Christology. I'm always interested in books on Christology. Do you know of any pastors that are Bible scholars? Yes, I have friends who are scholars and who are also pastors. Would you agree that there is evidence that King Josiah eliminated Asherah worship, thus eliminating the divine feminine and ushering in a more patriarchal religion? I don't know that I would say it was more patriarchal. I think Adonai was probably subsuming a lot of the roles, a lot of the functions of Asherah prior to this. But yes, I would agree that there's evidence that King Josiah eliminated Asherah worship. And Susan Ackerman and others have made wonderful cases for Josiah also eliminating ancestor worship and things like that. Can you talk about the authors of John, if there are more than one author, or when John uses we is a reference to we, the group of illiterate Christians who pay a scribe to write this book? Yeah, you have at the end of John where it says this is the testimony of the beloved disciple, or that disciple, or something like that. And then it says, and we know his testimony is true. Who's we? Where does we stop and John start? Is this all being described by we? And scholars have also pointed out there are a whole bunch of narrative incongruities and signs of editorial seams. So, like, there's a part where, you know, you've got the Last Supper, and Jesus is like, "Okay, that's it. Let's roll." And then you have 3 more chapters of discourse, and then it says, "So they got up and they left." And it's like, where did that come from? Or there's a part where he's in Jerusalem and he's preaching, and then the very next verse says, then they crossed over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. It's like something has been taken out, something has been added in, something has been edited here. This is not consistent. So there are a bunch of indications that there's a lot of editing that has gone on in the book of John, and there's a very clear indication that that at least part of the text was not the work of any beloved disciple, but was the work of a group of people. Volder, thank you so much for the question. How many stories about Jesus are in the oldest manuscripts, and how many were added later? And which ones, unless both lists would be too long? The easiest ones to pinpoint as added later are the largest, the long ending of Mark. So Mark 16:9 through the end of the chapter, that's all a secondary addition. And then the story of the woman taken in adultery is a secondary addition to the Gospel of John. And there are like 16-ish individual verses that crept into the manuscripts over the centuries that are now omitted from most translations of the New Testament. So, like, if you look in Matthew 17 in a new translation of the Bible, it will probably have verse 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24, and you'll have to look in the footnote to see verse 21, where they'll say some ancient manuscripts include or add or have or something like that, and then it will share what verse 21 said, but we know verse 21 was not original to the Gospel of Matthew, so it's taken out. There are like 16 verses like that. But if you're talking about stories about Jesus, yeah, the long ending of Mark and the woman taken in adultery are the two clearest examples. Ryan, thank you so much for the super chat. Aaron, thank you for another super chat. Unfortunately, I can't wear that Asherah shirt at work. I'm a teacher. I wear it. I wore it at Comic-Con. I wear it when I go to at least one of the days that I'm at the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature. And it's great because, like, if there's ever a place where people are going to know what that is and appreciate it, it's a conference of Bible scholars. And so, like, the last time I wore it in San Diego, we were waiting to get sat at a restaurant in the evening in the gas lamp district. And, like, from across the restaurant, somebody was like, "It's Asherah!" and came over and chatted for a while. So, yes, I can imagine that in a school, that's you don't want to hang a lot of dong in a school. Didymus, thank you so much for the question. Was hell based on Tartarus? Certainly there's a degree to which features of hell are based on Tartarus, and Tartarus is the word that is used in one of the Catholic epistles that is translated hell. So yes, I would say definitely to a degree. And I think Tartarus, the lake of fire is based on Tartarus, isn't it? I will have to revisit that. It's been a while since I've looked into that, but there are certainly features of the kind of traditional concept of hell that seems to be based on stuff like that. Jessica, thank you so much for the question. I'm planning on printing out a copy of your first book, Adonai's Divine Images. Does there exist an accompanying audiobook? Not yet. However, I asked the publisher if they would allow me to record and release an audiobook on my own for free. And it took them a while to get back to me, but they did finally say, yes, you have authorization to record that on your own and then release it for free. Just make sure that the publisher is included and everything like that. And so I started recording it, and then my publisher for of this book, The Bible Says So, for which I also recorded the audiobook myself, but not for free. They said, hey, people are talking about getting the free version of this audiobook, so hold off on releasing your audiobook of your earlier book until after this has run its course. So I'm holding off on recording the audiobook for Adonai's Divine Images, but yes, there will be a free audiobook, hopefully sometime next year. But yeah, I have a lot of work to do on that. Steve, thank you so much for the question. Have you been to Ramallah or Bethlehem? If so, how did the locals feel about Israelis or Judaism in general? I have yet to visit for financial reasons. Neither place is really visitable right now for most folks, unfortunately. More unfortunately, because a lot of people are dying because of the genocide that is going on over there. Not in Bethlehem or Ramallah, but yes, I have been there multiple times. The locals are wonderful people. There are Palestinian Christians. There are Palestinian Muslims. There Jewish folks tend not to go into there. The locals, I think, for the most part, are annoyed more with the government than and Zionism than they are with Judaism and Jewish folks in general, but I'm certainly not a sociologist dealing with those questions, and that's just my personal experience. They obviously are not happy with the way things have been going there, but I did not see much Judeophobia, anti-Semitism, hatred at Judaism or Israelis in general. It was mostly about leaders, the government, and Zionism that they were upset with. Glaziel, thank you so much for providing a pronunciation guide from Brazil. How come you're basically the only unbiased Bible scholar on YouTube? I wouldn't say I'm unbiased. I would say I have as many biases as others, but I probably work an awful lot harder than them to try to recognize those biases and avoid them when I do recognize them. And I don't know. I think there are an awful lot of folks who do a very good job. There are a lot of folks who are atheists who I think do a wonderful job and sometimes are more fair to religious folks than I am when it comes to their biases. I'm certainly not the only one. I would say that maybe I'm one of the more unbiased, or at least more aware of and willing to try to weed out the biases among those who identify as believers. But yeah, there are a lot of wonderful YouTubers out there. Somebody like Alex O'Connor. I've been on his show a couple of times. I think he does a wonderful job. And there are times when he will be more compassionate and more understanding towards the dogmas of believers than I am. So yeah, there are certainly people out there who do as good a job, if not a better job, than me. But I appreciate that compliment. D. Kutch, thank you so much for the question. Have you seen / read Robert Kirkman's Invincible? Isn't that just Invincible? If that's the well, yeah. In fact, let's see if you can, how much of this you can see. Those volumes right, yeah, those 3 white volumes right there are the compendia for the Invincible series that Ryan Otley sent me a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. And when I hung out with Ryan at Comic-Con, so these are all the comics I got while I was at Comic-Con. And there are several copies of Battle Beast. Where are they? Yeah, there we go. So I got Battle Beast 1. Where's 2? Where did 2 go? So Battle Beast is Robert Kirkman, Ryan Otley, and Annalisa Leone, who and Ryan gave me some of his, what did he call them? Exclusive, the variant covers of Battle Beast number 3. So yes, I have read all of Invincible. I'm following up on the spin-off Battle Beast, and then I also got a bunch of, had to catch up on Absolute Batman while I was there. So enjoying that, and then I also had to catch up on a lot of back issues of like Daredevil when he's fighting Punisher, and I had to pick up a bunch of Uncanny X-Men back issues around the 200 number. I got probably a dozen issues around there that I have been meaning to pick up. And then there's Daredevil fighting Wolverine and all that. So yes, very I have seen and read Invincible. And I really love Ryan Otley's artwork. I think he does a phenomenal job. Isvan, thank you so much for the question. Are there Book of Mormon verses particularly tricky to translate to other languages for doctrinal or other reasons? Maybe one's dependent on the Bible. Thanks. Yes, there are absolutely a lot that are difficult, and particularly when there are passages in the Book of Mormon that are reliant on the King James Version, and the King James Version is either wrong or it is understood differently. For example, that's not in the Book of Mormon. Okay, scratch that example. The Isaiah passages, that's something where it can be tricky. For instance, the guidance is whatever the preferred translation of the Bible is for that given language. You should just try to follow the Isaiah passages as closely as you can from that translation, unless that diverges too much from the sense of the English of those passages, in which case you then default to translating what the English says. And that can get pretty tricky. There are a lot of situations like that. 2 Nephi 25:23. I published a paper on this because that is where it says, we know that it is by faith we are saved after all we can do. And the paper that I published looked at, in fact, I can just pull it up and show you. So I haven't used StreamYard in a bit. Share screen. I should be able to do this without too much trouble. Okay, there we go. 2 Nephi 25:23 in literary and rhetorical context. So the last line, we know that it is by grace that we are saved after all we can do. This has long been interpreted to mean after we have done all that we can do, then grace kicks in to save us. And so the guidance has been to understand that passage that way and translate it that way. This paper demonstrates, not just argues, demonstrates that phrase would have been understood in the early 19th century to mean despite all we can do. And I go through and look at numerous examples of precisely that phrase being used in publications from the late 1700s and the early 1800s, even in discussions of faith and grace. And I demonstrate that there would have been no way that someone reading that passage in 1830 would have understood that to mean anything other than we are saved by grace despite all we can do. So that's an example where there's a tricky sorry, my 8-year-old was just shrieking and I had to wait to figure out if it was a happy shriek or an angry or a hurt shriek. It was a happy shriek. So that's an example of something that is frequently translated in a way that I think is incorrect. And so I published that paper. To my knowledge, my scholarship has not overturned the guidance that is provided translators. Historia Medicorum, thank you so much for the question. Hi, Dan, long-time lurker here. What bridged the mid-5th century BCE conclusion of the OT and 1st century CE NT? Any good resources to explore this time period? So there was no bridge because the Hebrew Bible continued to be edited and even composed in the 5th and the 4th and the 3rd and even into the 2nd century BCE. The book of Daniel, for instance, is primarily the work of the middle of the 2nd century BCE. But there was also a lot of other Second Temple Jewish literature that was being written. So things like First Enoch, things like the Book of Jubilees, a lot of the Apocrypha comes from this time period. First and Second Maccabees come from this time period. The Odes of Solomon, the Wisdom of Solomon, Judith. There's a ton of stuff from this time period that was phenomenally influential on the Judaism that is represented in the New Testament, which is why you have in the New Testament allusions to stories from First Enoch and quotations of even First Enoch and a bunch of apocryphal texts. So, but if you want to learn more about that literature, I'm trying to think if there's a single book that I would recommend. I think there's a book called, and then and also the Septuagint helped bridge in the sense that the Septuagint was the Hebrew Bible for the authors of the New Testament. Okay, there's a book by Lawrence Wills called Introduction to the Apocrypha, Jewish Books and Christian Bibles, and that's going to talk about the apocryphal texts, which were overwhelmingly written in Greco-Roman period Judaism. So that's going to be probably your most accessible and quickest introduction to the literature that was written in that time period that, quote unquote, bridges that gap. Thank you for the question. I just recently learned you are Mormon. I am a Christian, evangelical, free, and am not supportive of Mormon. Joseph Smith was a con man, IMO. You don't act like a Mormon. Why say you are Mormon? Because I am a Mormon. But, as I also repeatedly clarify, my Mormonism plays absolutely no role in the scholarly positions that I share or for which I advocate. So it is utterly irrelevant to the work of my channel. Andre says in Exodus 24, 9 through 11, Moses and the elders of Israel meet with God, and they ate and drank there. Does God eat with them? Are there traditions of deities sharing meals with humans behind that? There is the notion of a meal to seal a covenant. And Smith, why am I blanking on? This is like the scholar I've paid more attention to than Mark Smith. Oh gosh, I don't know why I couldn't think of his first name. I'm awful with names. Mark Smith's book, God in Translation, talks about this. Talks in the context of Exodus 24, 10 and 11, that a meal was frequently a way to ritually conclude or seal a covenant, and so this seems to be a way that is that's what the meal is doing there. Now, whether or not Adonai sat down at the table with them, I don't think that's clear from the text, but the idea would be that the meal would be shared in the sense that they were like, here you go, here's your place, here's your food, the kind of way you would share a meal with a deceased person by eating a meal in their mortuary chapel by their headstone or something like that, and you're just kind of symbolically sharing it with them. I think that's probably what's going on there. Jurassic Swerve says, if other gods do exist in the Bible, then why doesn't Baal set fire to the altar, and why does Paul call the Greek god statues demons and also call other gods false and idols? So a few things to note here. The contest with the prophets of Baal is taking place on the land of Israel. There are other gods all over the Bible, but they are not sovereign within the land of Israel. So the contest is about finding out who is Ha-Elohim, the God in the land of Israel. And the land of Israel is Adonai's inheritance, according to Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, and several other texts. And so Adonai is sovereign in the land. Baal has no power over Adonai in that land. If you go to 2 Kings 3, you see Adonai leading a coalition, an Israelite, Judahite, Edomite coalition into Moab to try to return Moab to vassalage. Now Adonai has lost home court advantage and is operating within the purview of another deity. And they are about to defeat the Moabite army and take the king. And it says the king offered his heir to the throne as a sacrifice on the city wall, and there was great fury against Israel, and they got up and they left. So the language that describes their retreat is the same language that describes Sennacherib's retreat after God kills 185,000 Assyrian troops just 16 chapters later. So why was there great fury, and why did it cause the coalition to retreat without achieving its goal? And ultimately, the prophecy failed. And scholars are in fairly widespread agreement that the best explanation, the only explanation that does not require we gin up scenarios that are not in evidence, is that the sacrifice worked, and it catalyzed the intervention of the Moabite patron deity Chemosh, who then ran off the invading force, because that was Chemosh's territory. That's the only explanation for what's going on there that actually makes sense of the available data and does not make up additional data that is not in evidence. So we do have examples of other gods defeating Adonai, and then you also have the Exodus that is described as Adonai says, I will judge the gods of Egypt. And when you get to Paul, there's a wonderful paper written by Paula Friedrichsen. In fact, I will pull it up. By this time period, the gods had all been squished down into angelic status, angelic/demonic status. But they still had power. And so Paul and the person pretending to be Paul writing Ephesians and things like that refers to thrones, principalities, powers, things like that. That's a way to refer to the invisible spiritual forces that used to be gods and now we just understand as angels and things like that. But a wonderful discussion of why, of the problem with trying to understand Paul as denying the existence of other gods is this paper by Paula Friedrichsen in Harvard Theological Review, Philo, Herod, Paul, and the Many Gods of Ancient Jewish Monotheism. This is a wonderful discussion of why Paul is not really denying the existence of other gods, but is precisely acknowledging the existence of other gods and really just arguing that they're all going to get theirs one day. That's the eschatological part of Paul's theology. But thank you for the question. Ty says, what is your golf handicap now? Any hole-in-ones? I have never had a hole-in-one. I have come phenomenally close several times. The last time I held a handicap, it was a 2.4. That was 2013. When I was in high school, and just after high school, I was more like a scratch golfer. I play golf maybe 3 or 4 times a year now, and I'm usually just trying to figure out how to get my wrist to stop hurting because I'm getting old. So I don't shoot very well. I went out and played last week. I didn't even keep track of my score. I birdied the first hole. I birdied the last 2. I don't know. I probably shot 80. So I don't know what my handicap would be today. I don't play enough to really establish one. Sum of Hand, thank you for the question. Could in the image of God he created him originally mean that only Adam is created in God's image because God is male? There's been discussion of that. In fact, in rabbinic literature, they say that Adam and and certain influential biblical characters were, Adam was created and the others were born circumcised, because Adam was created in the image of God, and the perfect male body is a circumcised body. So that certainly is an interpretation. It does raise the question of, but it does say created them. Let us create humanity in our image, after our likeness. It's not phenomenally clear what exactly they had in mind with that language. But the notion that women were not created in the image of God, I think, would be phenomenally problematic to maintain. Aniket, thank you so much for the question. Hey Dan, how are you doing? I'm doing well, thank you. My question is how Book of Job came to part of the scripture. Book of Job was probably written in the Persian period. It probably collects. It's probably a combination of a couple different things. You have this kind of narrative framework at the beginning of the end that was probably secondarily added to this meditation on the problem of evil, where Job and God get into it. It was popular. It was a popular approach to the problem of evil that would have been in circulation, and it didn't really have a place within the narrative of the nation of Israel. But I think the assumption that it predated the rise of Israel was a way to accommodate it to that meta narrative, and then it slid in that way. But because it was an influential and a popular meditation on the problem of evil, I think that's what helped it stay influential. Carrie, thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you for enabling my Bible nerd tendencies. I am happy to help. Martin Studios, thank you so much for the super chat. I just wanted to thank you for all you've done for me to understand the Bible more accurately. I'm 19 now and really happy that I'm able to think critically about my beliefs. I'm not a MAGA Christian, thanks to your work. Well, then, my work has been a success. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for the very kind words, and I hope you have a long and a healthy and a happy career within Christianity in the years that you have in front of you. LDEM, thanks so much. Just wanted to say, love the new book and the brutal reference. That's the Bible says so. My new book, and the brutal reference would be the meme, the that's brutal meme. I tried to use as much internet speak and deep cuts from some songs and some movies and stuff like that as I could in the book. In fact, I made a point out of. I used a deep cut from a movie to illustrate a point. I wonder if I could even find that really quickly. But I mentioned the idea of the tuning fork going off in your loins as I was talking about illusions and how people say things that they trust other people will recognize from literature and television and movies and stuff like that. And that was a quote from the movie Tin Cup. One of the few good golf movies. But I'm glad you enjoyed that reference. What time is it? Oh gosh. I'm gonna have to try to get through the rest of these comments as quick as I can. If you have not posted a comment here, or at least posted a super chat, please refrain. I'm gonna try to go back and forth between the live chat and the super chat. But I need to try to get through these comments so I can go help put some kids to bed. Where did Paul say same-sex impulses were a punishment? In Romans 1, what Paul says is that natural theology should lead people to recognizing the true God and how the true God expects to be worshipped. But people who do not worship the true God but worship the created instead of the creator, says God turns them over to their desires, resulting in things like male and female same-sex intercourse. So 26, 27, 28. So the idea is that same-sex intercourse is an outcome of God kind of removing the governor or the ceiling on the ability of the direction and the severity of sexual desire, because they have failed to properly worship God. Did Zoroastrianism predate biblical monotheism? If yes, did it influence it, and how? I would say there's no such thing as biblical monotheism. Monotheism was a post-biblical philosophical innovation. Zoroastrianism therefore predated monotheism, and I think the dualism of Zoroastrianism probably contributed to the development of a more clear dualism within Judaism, which contributed to the way the followers of Jesus understood the relationship of the different divine beings to each other. Warren, thank you so much for the question. The Old Testament seems to imply how important life in the here and now is. Yes. When does the switch happen to the hereafter being more important happen? I would say Greco-Roman period. That is where you have Job and these other meditations on the problem of evil. And I think what happens is they say, where do bad people get their punishment? Where do good people get their reward? We don't see it happening here. We just see oppression. We see empires crushing us. We see bad people succeeding. We see good people dying. And so the conclusion was arrived at that it must happen after death. And then you have the idea of post-mortem divine reward and punishment. And you have developing ideas of resurrection, of heaven, of hell. And that is probably when the eternal perspective begins to be the way to account for the problem of evil. So I think that's where the pivot. It's a long-term process, but I think that's the catalyst for the pivot. Excuse me. Ryan, thank you so much for the question. How does one explain Scripture being not a univocal text, not inspired, and the text is not even written by the traditional authors to the classic evangelical? Thanks, love your work. I'm still trying to figure that out, because that's going to rub right up against the dogmas and the credences that the classic evangelical considers central to their worldview, which I think makes it a phenomenally fragile and brittle worldview that they have to then fiercely defend in order to preserve. So there's not a good way to do it until evangelicalism is able to accommodate that view, which right now a lot of them refuse to accept. Is Dratum 7x7? Thank you so much for the question. Could 2 Timothy 2:12 be a punctuation issue? Have you heard this argument? I am wary of punctuation arguments because there was no punctuation in the manuscripts of the New Testament for centuries. So if we endure, we will also reign with him. If we deny him, he will also deny us. I don't see ways that punctuation. Yeah, I would say would be skeptical of retreating to punctuation as a way to make better sense of that text. But I can look into that a bit. I'm sure there have been people arguing about that. Grays 174, thank you so much for the super chat. Alan Watts renegotiated some of Jesus' sayings in order to advance his rhetorical goals. That as is his wont, as is most people's wont. Christopher Costello, thank you so much for the question. What do you think of mythicism? Was Jesus real? I think mythicism does not have a lot going for it. Because once you try to explain how the data got to be the way they are, I think it forces you to try to gin up scenarios that are not in evidence to account for things. I think by far the most likely explanation for how the data got to be the way they are is that there was an itinerant apocalyptic prophet who was crucified by Rome for his troubles, and his followers later said they saw him alive again. I think that is the most parsimonious explanation. That satisfies Occam's razor, and mythicism has to twist itself into all kinds of knots to try to dodge that. I think you said glacial. Thank you for the question. What's the right punctuation of Luke 23:43? Hang on just a moment. Let me pull it up. Again, there was no punctuation. Yeah, I think the traditional understanding is correct. Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Simeron meti mu esiento paradiso. So, yeah, the idea that it's saying, I tell you today that you will be with me in paradise in some time in the future, that doesn't make an awful lot of sense. Yeah, I don't think there's an argument to make for that. That's the kind of argument that makes sense if you're only dealing with the English, not with the Greek. Chris, thank you for the question. Genesis gives two different locations for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Is it possible that the tree we were not to eat of was the tree of life? I mean, lots of things are possible. The text doesn't. I don't think the text leaves that kind of confusion open. I think the tree of life isn't really introduced until after they until later. So yeah, I don't know that there are certainly things that are being omitted from the story because whoever's telling the story, I think, imagines that the audience is able to fill in the gaps, knows what's going on, and we've just lost that knowledge. But I don't think that is it at least is definitely not. They weren't supposed to eat from the tree of life to the exclusion of the prohibition on eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They may have also not been supposed to eat from the tree of life, but it is not that it was okay to eat from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, but not from the tree of life. Forum Galorum, thank you so much for the question. 2 Corinthians 13 is used by CUFI to justify the Gaza genocide. Can you please discuss this problematic passage? Well, that's a whole chapter. There is no justification for genocide, and no scripture could possibly be leveraged to make it okay to starve and kill children. Yeah, I have no idea what they're imagining would justify genocide in that passage. Yeah, but no, there's no justification for that. But I'll have to look up who is appealing to that passage, because that is horrific. Luke, thanks so much for the question. Hey, Dan, I'm currently studying theology. How does the data affect your faith? My scholarly beliefs make me feel oxymoronic. I don't discuss my personal belief on social media or in public or even in private. So that question is something that unfortunately I can't answer. I apologize for having to disappoint in that regard, but I will say that the one thing I will say is that I was an adult convert to Christianity, to religion, to the LDS Church, and I came into the church with most of the same perspectives I have now, and so not a lot has changed. SZ, no question tonight, just a thanks for your always great videos. Well, I appreciate that. That means a lot. Carl, thank you so much for the question. I recently had someone strongly claiming that historical Jesus did not make his person a condition of salvation. Referencing E.P. Sanders, I'd not heard this before. Do you have any thoughts to share? Jesus did not make his person a condition of salvation. I don't know what you mean by that, but if you mean like an idea about his prosopological person, belief about who he was as a person, I don't think that's a condition for salvation anywhere in the New Testament, but I'm afraid I'm not clear on exactly what you're talking about. Person, a condition of salvation. Maybe someone in the live chat can clarify that for me, because you don't discuss what you believe even in private. Yes, that is correct. With my family, with close friends, I do, but with like somebody who happens to run into me on the street, no, I don't. Somebody saying, sounds to me like he means the stuff about having to believe in Jesus to be saved. I think if you're saying that if this is like a challenge to the I am the way, the truth, and the life, idea that Jesus, you have to believe in Jesus to be saved. I think there are certainly parts of the New Testament that claim that. Whether or not the historical Jesus said that, I don't think there's a case to make that the historical Jesus said that. So E.P. Sanders is one of the pioneers of historical Jesus research. If E.P. Sanders said that, I would not take challenging him lightly. So yeah, if that's what you mean, I think there's a case to make that the historical Jesus did not go around saying, you have to believe that I am God to be saved or anything like that. Macro, thank you so much for the question. Hey, Dan, big fan of you. Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. How do you translate Vayehi to English literally? I can't really think of any. It only makes sense in Hebrew. I'm a speaker of it. I would say, and it happened that, or something like that. That would be the most idiomatic way. A lot of people don't translate it, particularly if it's introducing a temporal clause. But yeah, if you wanted to translate it, I would say, and it happened that, or something like that. Grays 174, Alan Watts' interpretation of John 10:34 is what you'd expect. Well, thank you for verifying my expectation. JG, thank you for the question. I've been binging everything N.T. Wright lately. Do you have any thoughts on Wright? The kingdom theology he talks about is new to me. I have a lot of friends who are highly critical of N.T. Wright. I think I think Wright is a thoughtful theologian, but certainly a theologian and not a critical scholar. And I disagree with a lot of what Wright has to say about the relationship of Second Temple Judaism to early Christianity. But yeah, most of the friends of mine who are New Testament specialists or scholars of Paul are not huge fans of Wright. Gab in the Philippines, thanks so much for the question. According to you, does Paul contradict himself about circumcision? He circumcised Thomas, but in Galatians 5, he preaches against it. Well, it depends on how you interpret what he's talking about. If he's talking about respecting like ethnic conventions and identity markers, I think there's a way that you could harmonize things a bit, but that's not my field. And I would talk to someone like Matt Thiessen or something like that, or somebody like that. Logan Williams, one of those guys, would be much better qualified to talk about that. I think there would certainly be people out there saying Paul was contradicting himself. I think there would also be people arguing that there's a way to understand those things as not mutually exclusive. But because that's not my specialization, I'm going to defer to other specialists. Adam, thank you so much for the question. Do you have any thoughts on biological explanations for religiosity, schizotypical personalities seeding early religions, and OCD developing ritual? I don't think you need to go to those kinds of conditions for that. I mean, you can look at Ilka Pisianin's book, Supernatural Agents for a Cognitive Science of Religion, account for concepts of deity. You can look at Harvey Whitehouse's book, The Ritual Animal, for a discussion of how ritual starts. And ritual definitely doesn't need OCD. We have ritual all over society, in every segment of society. We just tend to not label it as such because we've kind of cordoned off religion as the site of ritual. Yeah, you can look at, there are Pascal Boyer's got some great discussions of religion. Aranor and Sion and Perzicki, they talk about what they call morally concerned deities, and there's a book called Big Gods, which talks about the rise of national deities. So the cognitive science of religion, one of my specializations, is all about figuring out the cognitive roots of all of these things. And yeah, you don't need to go to schizotypal personalities or OCD. It's a natural part of perfectly neurotypical human cognition, and obviously can be heightened in neurodiverse minds. But yeah, cognitive science of religion has a whole bunch of stuff on that. S. Rami PR. I apologize. I don't know how to divide up what your name there. Thank you for the question. Just found you a couple weeks ago, and now I'm a big fan. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Have you ever addressed the so-called prosperity gospel? Yes, I have. It is trash. Thanks for all you do. Yeah, the prosperity gospel basically says, let's ignore the New Testament. Let's go back to the fact that Hebrew Bible authors and heroes were wealthy and prominent and had a lot of power and stuff like that. And let's just try to transfer that and overlay that on our notion of Christianity. Yeah, it's trash. But thank you for a question, or the question. Suma Leth, thank you for the question. Do Christians generally think of God as a human-like creature existing somewhere outside of our universe, or do they have another physical representation in mind? Overwhelmingly, Christians, when they are not actively contemplating orthodox correctness and things like that, will default to an anthropomorphic conceptualization of deity. That's been demonstrated by empirical research. And so it is only when they are actively keeping orthodoxy and theological correctness in mind that they're like, no body parts or passions. Yeah, an anthropomorphic conceptualization of deity is the default and is pretty consistent from beginning to end in the Bible. It's really post-biblical philosophical stuff that overturns that and results in this immaterial concept of deity. You can look in Origen, his text first principles, I forget what it is, but the text is pretty much making a case that God is incorporeal and immaterial, and he starts off by pointing out that the Bible and seems to suggest that God has a body, and Jewish people think God has a body, and even some Christians think God has a body, and he says that's nonsense because the philosophers despise it. So that's a philosophical innovation. God King Flex, thank you so much for the question. How has the forged Pauline epistles and often misunderstood book of Revelation shaped Christianity? Poorly. How would Christianity look if they were omitted? I think you would have a lot less talk of hell. I think you would have a lot less talk of the end times. You would have a lot less talk of Armageddon and all of this crap. Without Revelation, without the forged Pauline epistles, I think you would have less misogyny. It would obviously not be free of misogyny. The rest of the New Testament is still deeply patriarchal, but at least you would not have. And I'm going to throw 1 Corinthians 14, 33 through 35 in there, because I think that probably comes from the same folks who are responsible for at least 1st and 2nd Timothy. And so I think those are the biggest proof texts for these asinine notions that women aren't allowed to have authority and need to just stay in the kitchen. The kind of crap that some folks have been getting prominent on social media for over the last few days for saying. I think Christianity would be in a much better place without those two sets of texts. Division 1, thank you so much for the question. Is there any evidence Paul was commissioned or influenced by the Roman authorities? None that I'm aware of. That strikes me as a conspiracy theory that people come up with. Andrew, thank you so much for the question. Dan, have you read the Borges 3 versions of Judas? Muses that since Judas's act was necessary for salvation and he's suffering more than JC, he's the savior. I have not read that, but that's not... he's not the first to come up with that. Even the Gospel of Judas kind of gets close to that. And there is a theory that at least in the earliest gospel, the Gospel of Mark, Judas is never explicitly described as being under the influence of Satan or of being influenced by evil. Judas seems to be a character who's like, oh, maybe setting up the meeting here will catalyze divine intervention, and that will get the ball rolling. Oops, that went horribly wrong. So maybe Judas is just a tragic figure in the history of Christianity. If you just look at the Gospel of Mark, it's the later Gospels that are like, Satan entered him, and was the puppet master. So that's something that different groups and different interpretations have stumbled upon a number of times and ways in the past. I'm going to have to do my Duolingo pretty soon here. But the notion that he's the savior, that's taking it a little further than most have. Nemo, thanks so much for the question. Dan, what are your thoughts on the intelligent design movement, and can it be decoupled from Christianity? I mean, I don't know why who would want to decouple it from Christianity. I would never put it past the right-wing authoritarians on Twitter to do something like that. But I think the intelligent design movement has always been phenomenally misguided. And they need to, I think they need to do better and return to the textbooks and learn to think more critically about these things. Roberto, thank you for the question. Which of your videos would you recommend for introducing an evangelical friend to your channel? He's trying to evangelize me. Evangelicals tend not to take very well to my channel, irrespective of the video that is the introduction. But on my I think my YouTube channel, I think on certainly on TikTok, maybe on Instagram, I've recently uploaded a new intro video, which is probably 6 to 8 minutes, somewhere around there. But that's probably the best introduction to me and my channel. But it's probably not going to win over evangelicals who are trying to evangelize you. Mel, thank you, Mill. Excuse me. Thank you so much for the question. Do you think the plot holes in books like Genesis are evidence these stories were compiled late and without much time for criticism and re-editing? I think it's an indication that they were cobbled together. I don't know that it is time that was the problem. There were centuries for re-editing and stuff like that. But I think they came together in a period when the message was the locus of authority more than the text itself. And so as long as the message got through, it didn't matter what the words on the page said as much. And I think that changes when you get to like the 2nd century CE. So I think it's that they were compiled relatively late, particularly compared to a traditional timeline of the biblical narrative, but early enough that they were not compiled in a period when there was a lot of concern for textual integrity and purity and things like that. But thank you for the question. Jonathan HQ, thank you so much for the super chat. Hey, Dan, I went to a Christian high school, and in my senior year, we learned from the textbook Understanding the Culture by Dr. Jeff Myers. I'd love to see a debunking of its propaganda and nonsense. I am unfamiliar with this text. Understanding a Survey of Social Engagement. Originally published March 2017. You did not go to high school very long ago. Well, I will have to look into this. Yeah, I'm sure it does an awful job of engaging. I'll have to look into that. Thank you for making me aware of that text and for the question. Captain Katainer, or Captain K. Tainer, I apologize. I'm sure your name is a lot more clever than I'm giving it credit for. Thank you for the question, though. My wife and I are thinking of naming our baby Elchanan if it's a boy. Thank you for introducing the more complete history of Goliath and David to me. Well, I am glad that I could introduce you to that figure. And I would love, that would be great, because that person would have to explain where their name came from whenever somebody was like, that's an interesting name, where'd that come from? And that would help share more information more widely and broadly. Thank you so much. J. Court Mail, thank you so much for the super chat. Steve, thanks for another question. Did the people you met in Ramallah or Bethlehem that you met have any interest in the ancient Philistines or otherwise claim descent from them? Not really. They, for the most part, they asserted, genealogical roots in the land going all the way back to the Bronze Age, but I don't recall anybody saying it was specifically from the Philistines. I'm sure there are plenty of folks who think of it that way, but I never personally came across that. Matt Festa, thank you so much for the question. Sorry if this is a silly question, but has there been any academic study of the Kolbrin and the Kailadi, or is this just agreed there is nothing to it? I am not familiar with those. The Kolbrin Bible? That's the first thing that's coming up. Egyptian Celtic wisdom text offers the knowledge of those who survived past global catastrophes. If that's what you're talking about, yeah, there's definitely nothing to that. But let me... and I'm not finding anything looking for Kailadi or Kailadi. Oh, wait a minute. Kolbrin Kailadi. Collection of ancient manuscripts said to have been salvaged from the Glastonbury Abbey arson in 1184. The Kolbrin is also said to have had a connection to Jesus historically through his great uncle Joseph of Arimathea. Yeah, that's nonsense. That kind of stuff is pops up all over in the medieval period and later, claiming to be these ancient texts. You see it an awful lot, and funny enough, particularly in Italy and particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries, you get a lot of descriptions of Jesus as blonde-haired and blue-eyed and light-skinned, and a stark contrast to all these swarthy Jewish people around him, which is idiotic white supremacist anti-Semitic crap. Wade, thank you so much for the question. If the Gospel of John shows edits that indicate it was put together by a committee of writers, is that true of the other three Gospels? People who could write Greek likely came from moneyed families. Publishing was expensive. I certainly the Gospel of Luke shows signs that at least like chapters 1 and 2 may have been added later. I don't think Mark and Matthew show near as much indication of writing by committee. I think John is the clearest indication of that, but it's certainly a possibility. And there are folks who have talked about redactional layers in some of the Gospels. Mike, thank you for the question. Who/what are the Antichrist passages in 2 Thessalonians about? Did the author believe the man of sin was someone specific? What exactly were they expecting? 2 Thessalonians was probably not written by Paul. I think Antichrist is actually in the epistles of John, not in 2 Thessalonians. So connecting the man of sin and everything with the Antichrist, I don't think is accurate. But I think Second Thessalonians is probably coming up with an excuse for the delay of the parousia. This is why Jesus hasn't come back yet. This man of sin was probably not somebody specific, was probably just a generic figure. And it was a way to account for the delay of the parousia, in my opinion. Anikat, forgive me for asking the most pertinent question. Batman or Superman? Pick one. Superman. Love Batman, though. But if I have to pick one, Superman was my guy first. And thank you for asking the most pertinent question. Sketchy Getchy, thank you so much for the question. Have you heard of 17 Points of the True Church? I have. If so, would you be open to breaking them down to their original meaning? I don't remember what they are, but I am rather skeptical of them. Let me see what the and this is apologetics. This is taking a conclusion, namely that the LDS Church is true, and then going and combing through the Bible and looking for proof texts. And so that's all this is doing. And yeah, I can't do it right now, but yeah, there would be you would be able to go through here and show that what those texts were actually talking about in their earliest contexts probably is not supportive of the way the texts are being characterized in the 17 points argument. So I would say that it's a problematic claim to make. But I can't go through it right now, but maybe at some point I can make a video about that. Sable Spectre, thank you so much for the question. Any book recs about angels trying to settle what biblically accurate means? Looks more like Dante's Paradiso to me. Is that the origin? There's no such thing as biblically accurate angels. Certainly not the reference to the Ophanim in Ezekiel 1. So when people talk about things with feathers and wheels and eyes and all that stuff, those are those are never identified as angels anywhere in the Bible, and really it's just this apocalyptic vision that Ezekiel has. So no, that's entirely biblically inaccurate angels that they're talking about. A book on angels, I'm trying to think, there haven't really been many popular ones, many written for a broad audience, but there is an academic one that I think is really good. There's a series published by Walter de Gruyter, Deuterocanonical and Cognate Literature. And 2000, I think it was published in 2008. No, 2007. 2007, they have their yearbook 2007, and the topic is angels, the concept of celestial beings, origins, development, and reception. So let me just share the screen briefly with you. Edited by Friedrich Reiter, Tobias Niklas, and Karin Schöpflin. But where's the table of contents? So you've got angels or demons, divine messengers in ancient Egypt, demons and benevolent spirits in the ancient Near East, the divine messenger in ancient Greece, Etruria, and Rome, divine messengers and mysterious men in the patriarchal narratives, Moses and the Exodus angel. The angel is the one form of divine communication in the Balaam narratives, the angel in Samson's birth narrative, and it goes on and on and on and on like that. So that is probably the most thorough academic treatment of the concept of angels that you can find in one place, but it is very academic, very technical. But thank you for a great question. Larkwright, thank you so much for the super sticker. Ag Cobb, please excuse me if I've mispronounced that. Thank you so much for the question. I'm curious about the pronunciation of Adonai as Adonai. If you could briefly explain, is that how Yod Vav Hey Yod pronounced in modern Hebrew? No, Adonai is a substitution. It is a special form of the word Lord. It literally is my lords, but it's an honorific way to refer to the Lord, specifically God, and it began to be used as a substitution for the Tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He, the divine name, probably 2nd century BCE into the 1st century BCE. I use it because I have Jewish friends and other Jewish folks in my audience on social media who have asked me if I would not mind using it, and that is not a costly accommodation on my part. I'm happy to do it. It's something I have done in academic settings many times in the past, so not a big deal for me. But it is not how Yod He Vav He was pronounced. It is openly a substitution of one word for another. Jody, thank you so much for the super chat. John McGimpsey, thank you so much. Appreciate your continued good work. I appreciate the very kind words. Thank you. Scott, thank you for the question. How much prep goes into your TikToks? Very little for a lot of them. Usually I'll see a video and be like, ooh, and we'll set up my camera and then start yapping. There are a lot of takes that frequently go into them because I don't script anything. And so sometimes it takes me 5, 10, 15, sometimes as many as 20 takes to get what I want to say out in something approximating the way I want to say it. And so in terms of research, if it's a research question I don't know much about, I might come back to it and revisit the research a handful of times over the course of a week or two. If it's something where I've responded to it in the past, but I don't have all the details clearly in mind, I might go refresh myself by watching an old video or doing a little original research. Because I've done thousands of videos, over 3,000 videos now, there are a lot of things where I can, make a video at the drop of a hat and not have to go research anything and know all the details right off the top of my head. So it kind of depends, but as little research as I can get away with these days, unless it's something really serious and it's something that I have not engaged before. So yeah, just enough to get away with it is probably a one way to answer that question. But thank you for a great question. Richie, thanks so much. How do you feel about silly Christians' kids' mascots like Veggie Tales, Bible Man, Salty the Songbook, et cetera, and which is the funniest to you? So in a recent podcast, can't remember if it was my podcast or I was a guest. I think it was my podcast. My podcast co-host and I started talking about Bible Man, and I looked up some old episodes, and holy crap, that is the funniest thing in the world. Like Veggie Tales, at least the music is entertaining. Like they do a good job, but Bible Man was just awful. So I think Bible Man is the funniest. Ezek, thank you so much for the question. Have you done collabs, and have you heard of Ready to Harvest, and would he be someone you might do a collab with? Thanks for your work. I have done collabs. I don't think I have heard of Ready to Harvest, but I'm not kind of in the Christian denominations explained in a neutral and concise way. Like I wouldn't be opposed to collaboration, but I don't generally seek out collaborations. But yeah, I'd have to look into that channel and see what it's all about. Oh, it's almost 10:30. All right, I've got a lightning round here. Eric, thank you so much for the question. Gnosticism formed early and focused on secret teachings of Jesus. Any evidence that the historic Jesus actually had secret teachings? No, no evidence about that. Gnosticism is more about an overlaying of middle Gnostic cosmogony and cosmology upon the Bible. May have originated in Judaism. There's debate about that. But yeah, I don't see any evidence. Like it's certainly possible, but I don't see any data that points in the direction of that conclusion. Ryan, thanks so much for the question. Hey, Dan, I have a question. I'm thinking about getting a PhD. I can't decide between two fields as an academic. Would you be suspicious of someone with multiple PhDs? Love the book and your videos. Thank you for the kind words. I wouldn't be suspicious. I would be surprised that somebody was willing to put themselves through that much punishment. And had the money to do so. Sometimes people who are like, I have 8 PhDs. I know they're not all rigorous and legitimate, but someone with 2 PhDs, if they went through the work and honestly earned 2 PhDs, I would have nothing but respect for that and a little bit of fear. Jonathan, thank you so much for the question. What are your views on the philosopher Michel Foucault, and his influence on modern society? Thank you for your work. I am generally appreciative of Foucault's influence. Of course, there are criticisms, but I think it's important stuff to keep in mind. And there are a lot of ways that the findings of things like cognitive linguistics and the cognitive science of religion buttress Foucault's work on a lot of stuff. So I am in general appreciative. Glyciel, I mean, why the reading I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise, would be wrong. It's just not it would be an unusual way to phrase that in Greek. I tell you today. It makes a lot more sense the way the Greek is worded. And I don't know how to. I would have to go back to see how grammarians have explained the precise principles underlying it, but it just is awkward in Greek to interpret it that way. And but it's been a long time since I've had it explained to me, so I can't remember off the top of my head precisely what the issue is with the Greek. But I think it's just an awkward rendering. It would be far more likely. Or it's just an awkward reading, phrasing in the Greek. It would be far more likely to understand the today to be going with the contents of the statement. Sanity Plate, thank you so much for the question. What about the original names of the apostles? I don't know what you mean by what about the original names of the apostles. I can't recall a question or a comment that this could be building on. I apologize. I'm not exactly sure how to answer that. There's certainly, like, when we look in the Gospels, they have different names for some of the apostles, and I think that's probably just because they had different traditions. Some people try to reconcile it by saying, oh, they had, multiple names, and one is just using one name and another gospel is using another name. But I think it was probably because there were different traditions in circulation, if that's what you're talking about. Ned, thank you for the question. Enjoy your channel. Curious if you're familiar with the scholarship of Ammon Hillman on ancient Greek medical texts and the Old and New Testament / Apocrypha. Ammon Hillman's scholarship is not rigorous, is not well respected, and some of his claims are just downright asinine, like the notion that the Hebrew Bible is originally written in Greek and the Hebrew is a translation. That's pure and utter nonsense. That is a laughable claim, and to my knowledge has never published an academic book. The one book that he's published was actually through the same publisher that my trade volume is through. It's a trade volume and was not peer reviewed. And he is also a mean-spirited individual who mocks and attacks and uses inappropriate gestures and commentary and stuff like that to demean and belittle. So whatever respect I may have ever had for Ammon went out the window a long time ago. But yeah, nobody takes his scholarship seriously. At least the claims about the Hebrew Bible and Jesus being a pedophile and all this kind of stuff. Phil, thank you so much for the comment. Without Bronze Age collapse, does Christianity take over the world? No. I think without the Bronze Age collapse, you do not have a power vacuum that allows for territorial states to pop up in the 12th century BCE, and I think Israel does not successfully establish itself as a monarchy as a result. That's my answer. Samantha, thank you so much for the question. Do you have a favorite bad translation of the Bible, least favorite good translation? The Word on the Street translation is probably my favorite bad translation of the Bible. Least favorite good translation, the NIV. I have tested a variety of different English Bible translations. The NIV, the Language Register, I think is the best that people have achieved in terms of accessibility and prose and all that kind of stuff. People like that the most. The NIV is an awful translation, though. So yeah. Justin, thanks so much for the question. Hey, Dan, thanks for all you do. Thank you. I appreciate it. Seems like the past month or two, you have recorded videos covering the Trinity. Being LDS, I have read Hebrews 1:1-6, covering God plus the Son, Jesus Christ. Any history / info regarding this scripture? So what Hebrews is doing is it's taking Old Testament passages and rereading them as references to Jesus. And in relation to the angels. And so like it's talking about Psalm, I think 45, which originally was a reference to David, and it's reinterpreting it as a reference to Jesus. So I don't think it really helps the Trinity very much. I think the author is aware that they are reinterpreting the text, but that is definitely a set of texts relevant to early Christology that I have not engaged nearly as much or nearly as directly as I have engaged things like John and Mark and Philippians and stuff like that. So that is a gap in my research, and I will need to more directly address Hebrews 1:1-6. But it's kind of a traditional just renegotiation of some Old Testament texts that were not a reference to God that are being reinterpreted as a reference to Jesus. Danju Aguilar, thank you for so much for the super chat. And Frank, thank you for the super chat. And hopefully we're getting close to the end, so I can go help my kids get to bed. Joseph, thank you so much. Thanks for the tools needed to combat the distortion of Scripture for evil purposes. Well, I'm glad you're taking up the battle. I appreciate it. I appreciate the honest responses and candor. Thank you so much for the kind words, Joseph. They mean a lot. And I apologize. I'm gonna mispronounce this name, Ilgin. Thank you so much for the question. Do you think the NT writers created narratives by using the Hebrew Bible? Like out of Egypt, I called my son originally points to the Exodus, but in the NT, it turns into Jesus having to go to Egypt. Yes, particularly with Matthew. Matthew is telling the story in a way that allows him to draw connections to the Hebrew Bible. So yes, absolutely, the out of Egypt thing is only in Egypt or only in Matthew, and it becomes a way for him to say, here's another prophecy that is fulfilled by Jesus. And there are a number of examples where Matthew is altering the narrative that they have in their source texts in order to allow him to draw connections to the Hebrew Bible. So yes, that's absolutely going on, at least in the Gospel of Matthew. All right, thank you everybody so much for your time, and I apologize for that I was not able to get to all the questions and comments, particularly in the live chat. Hopefully things were peaceful in there. Somebody says, okay, hear me out. We need a panel with Dan Forrest v. Milo, Prof. Dave, everyone devoted to debunking and spreading truth. I'm going to be on some panels at DragonCon as part of the Skep track at the end of this month. So I don't know if Forrest is going to be there, or be on the panels, but Forrest was there last year, and talking with him is one of the reasons that that I'm involved in the Skep track at DragonCon. So yeah, come to DragonCon, and I'll have more information on the panels soon. DragonCon, yes, it's kind of like Comic-Con, but the scope is broader. It ropes in fantasy literature, tabletop role-playing games. There's a lot of cosplay, all kinds of stuff. It takes over downtown Atlanta the end of August, beginning of September every year. There's a parade that is on TV. You get to see costumes created from the Marriott Hotel's carpet that was retired many years ago. It's a wonderful time. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate your time. As always, it means a lot. I appreciate your support. I hope that you have people around you that you love and that love you. I hope you have a warm, safe place to spend the night and plenty of food on your table. And I appreciate all the support, allowing me to do something for a living that I never imagined I would have the privilege of being able to do. It's the coolest job in the world and an incredible privilege. And I will try to be more regular about the live streams, at least once a week going forward, if I can. I have been phenomenally busy this summer and even before this summer. Hopefully things chill out for the end of the year. But thank you so much. I will see you all around. Have a wonderful night.